In 29 BC, on the heels of victory over Marcus Antonius and Cleopatra, Caesar Augustus attempted to pass legislation penalizing celibacy while rewarding and even requiring respectable marriage amongst the Roman people. The reasoning behind the laws was twofold. First and foremost, 60 years of civil wars had depleted the pool of young men required to populate Rome's legions. But his secondary purpose was to amplify the anti-Cleopatra propaganda he had begun approximately 2 years before the Battle of Actium, cleverly presented to the people as a desire to return to traditional Romanism. During the late Republic, Rome had become far too Greek in the eyes of Caesar Augustus. Sophisticated young men about town, mostly made up of Rome's young nobility, prized culture, sophistication, and pleasure above all else. Calling themselves the Urbani, these young men, made up of the likes of Publius Clodius Pulcher, Marcus Caelius Rufus, and even the young Marcus Antonius, donned goatee beards and wore their hair longer, attracting to themselves like-minded young women about town in the fashion of Fulvia Flacca Bambula and the sisters of Publius Clodius, all named Clodia. As the celebrities of their day, their behavior was proudly imitated by Rome's youth, and this new culture of young party people overtook Rome during the latter years of the Republic, bringing with it a lifestyle of numerous divorces, adulteries, and an unwillingness to bear children. Just where had such pursuits and chasing after romantic love, as described by Greek poets, led Marcus Antonius? Straight into the arms of an Eastern monarch. It was high time for Romans to stop worshipping Greek ideals and Eastern morals. And to that end, Caesar Augustus began an aggressive campaign to give them, instead, the standard of ideals and morals to which Romans should aspire. In touring the city of Alexandria in the wake of the deaths of Antonius and Cleopatra, Caesar Augustus saw what a truly cosmopolitan city looked like. From the tombs of the pharaohs to the Great Library and the Pharaoh's Lighthouse, Alexandria's very architecture paid homage to its Egyptian and Greek heritage in spectacular fashion. Upon his return to Rome, Caesar Augustus wasted no time implementing changes meant to similarly transform his city into the cosmopolitan center of the world, all while paying homage to Rome's rustic Latin heritage. He began construction of his great mausoleum on the Campus Martius, as well as continuing the reconstruction of the Forum Romanum and surrounding area begun by his father, Julius Caesar. But it would take more than impressive architecture to influence the behavior of the populace. Through his good friend, Gaius Maecenas, who traveled in well-known artistic and literary circles, a cultural movement was born. Artisans, musicians, sculptors, and poets were called upon to recreate the image of Rome in glorified and romanticized shades of her past. The landscape was quickly embellished with statues of Caesar's sister and wife, wearing the traditional stola and hairstyles associated with women of the old Republic. Coins were minted that honored Augustus' deified father, Julius Caesar. Even epic poems were commissioned to be written, tracing Rome's divine origins from the goddess Venus and the fall of Troy, right up to the golden era of Caesar Augustus himself. But as Augustus, who had declared war against the monarchical ambitions of Marcus Antonius, hypocritically outdid him with tyrannical edicts heretofore never imagined, he discovered just where his own authority ended. The people of Rome would not have him in their bedrooms, nor would the Senate. And so Caesar Augustus, who needed the support of the Senate following the first constitutional settlement, retracted his moral legislation and let the matter drop, until about 18 BC. Coming home again from the east, now bearing the rescued battle standards lost to Parthia and Armenia, Caesar Augustus, who had spent a decade subtly accumulating power, had no intention of wasting his political capital. Taking advantage of the people's excitement while promoting his upcoming golden age of peace known as the Pax Romana, Augustus used his tribunician authority to pass the Lex Julia Adulteriis Coascendis and the Lex Julia Maritandis Ordinibus regarding adultery and marriage, as the masses enjoyed a new form of festivities called the secular games. Previously a private matter between a man, his wife and her father, adultery under the new lex Julia adulteriis coessendis became a crime against the state. This law not only forced a husband to prosecute an adulterous wife, but left him open to third-party prosecution if he failed to do so. Under the lex Julia adulteriis, a husband who caught his wife with her lover could forcibly detain her lover in his home for up to 20 days, while witnesses were secured for the prosecution. If found guilty by the Senate, which now sat in judgment over adultery trials under Augustus's new legislation, a woman's father was permitted to put her to death or to have her banished. The husband, however, was not permitted to kill his wife or her lover. A husband had 60 days to prosecute an adulterous wife before charges could be brought against him as a pimp. If found guilty by the Senate, both the wife and her lover were to be exiled to different islands, with the wife forfeiting half her dowry and the man losing half his property. The lex Julia adulteriis also reduced the judgment against a husband who killed his wife in a blind rage, having caught her in flagrante delicto, but such behavior was not encouraged, as adultery was seen as more of a crime against the woman's father than against her husband. The lex Julia maritandis ordinibus, the second of Augustus' laws, defined the societal norms governing who could marry and delineated the duties of marriage. This law encouraged marriage and procreation for men between the ages of 25 and 60, and for women between the ages of 20 and 50, with the expectation that these marriages would each produce 3 children among the nobility and 4 children among the masses. Divorced or widowed persons were expected to remarry as soon as legally possible. Those who succeeded in producing 3 and 4 living children, having fulfilled their duty to the state, became exempt from the obligation to remarry if they became divorced or widowed. The enforcement of the lex Julia maritandis was implemented through Rome's laws of inheritance. Under this new Augustan legislation, an unmarried person was no longer permitted to inherit as a primary or secondary heir, but only as an heir in the 7th degree. Those who were married but had no children could inherit only half of what was bequeathed to them, while those with less than 3 children, or whose children did not survive, could inherit slightly more than half, but were forced to follow a complicated set of procedures in order to obtain their inheritances. Additionally, harsh taxes were imposed on unmarried people, while those who did their duty to the state, producing the required number of children, were favored for political advancement in regards to magistracies, priesthoods, and provincial offices. Unclaimed inheritances became vacant, and in the event no secondary or tertiary heirs met the legal criteria, eventually reverted to the state treasury. Augustus' marriage laws also stipulated who could marry whom, by penalizing marriages between members of senatorial families and those belonging to freedmen, as well as between Roman citizens and foreigners. Marriage to anyone who worked as a prostitute or an actor was not sanctioned. Children produced from such marriages were deemed illegitimate by the state. These children were issued no birth certificates, and their names were not included on a town's list of residents. As non-citizens, such individuals had no rights of inheritance, and their parents were relegated to unmarried persons without children for the purposes of taxation and inheritance. Men who made less than 100,000 sesterces annually, and women who made under 50,000 sesterces, were exempted from Augustus's marriage laws. Consequently, his law was seen as an attack against the upper classes by those who resented the Roman government's interference in their private domains. "How can the state be preserved if we neither marry nor have children?" came Caesar Augustus' response. "It is neither right nor creditable that our race should cease with us, and the city given over to foreigners, Greeks or even barbarians. After all, hadn't it been pleasure and vice, sophistication and culture, without duty and nationalism, which had led Marcus Antonius to idolize Greek culture so much that he had given half the Roman Empire to Cleopatra? Despite backlash from the nobility as well as the equestrian class, Augustus' adultery and marriage legislation passed into law. doubly enforced by the new network of parasitic spies and informants who popped up to eke out their livings by revealing undesirable marriages and illicit love affairs. Parent and non-parent, married and unmarried, none were safe from exposure by informants, save one man, Caesar Augustus himself, who had taken Terentia, the wife of his philanthropic friend Gaius Maecenas, as his latest mistress.